sold off a long time ago. The carvings I have now are all made from pre-ban ivory.
But environmental groups dispute that claim. Last year, posing as ivory buyers, investigators secretly recorded Daniel Chan. In the recording, he says he can easily replace his old ivory, and the government can't tell the difference.
After I sell an ivory item, I can use illegal ivory to top up my stock again. I can simply exchange with anything. The officials have no idea how to manage this industry.
Peter Knights is the executive director of WildAid, one of the NGOs that took part in the investigation.
And what we think has been happening is these registered stockpiles that they have, they've been basically hanging on to the certificates and moving ivory through. So, you know, they'll be selling ivory on, but still miraculously keeping the same stocks left at the end. And so the paperwork is used to launder ivory from poached elephants.
There's evidence that some of Hong Kong's legal ivory traders may be doing much more than just laundering their old ivory stocks for new. So this shop, Taiwan, this is another well-known Hong Kong ivory dealer. I'm going to go and see if they will talk to us. I ask if I can speak to the boss. I tell him I'm from the BBC. He doesn't want to let me through the door.
I don't know anything about this ivory business. So this business become very sensitive.
I understand.
We're doing everything
legally.
We don't want to be bothered.
Yeah. But again, investigators posing as ivory buyers found a very different story here. In this recording, the investigator gasps as she's shown several hundred kilos of raw ivory tusks stored under a plastic sheet at the back of the shop. The trader then tells her he can get plenty more.
Illegal ivory can be bought everywhere. But do you dare to take the risk? If you dare, I can have it sent to you straight from Africa. I can get any amount, up to 10 tons of ivory at any time.
Given such evidence, you might think Hong Kong Customs would be keeping a very close eye on shipments imported by the city's legal ivory dealers. You might be surprised to hear that the list is not available to the public, but surely Customs have a copy. I asked the Deputy Director of Hong Kong's Agriculture Fisheries Conservation Department, Simon Chan. Does Customs have the name list?
If there are need to do the investigation, we provide them with the information required actually for their enforcement and investigation as well.
But does Customs have the name list of traders?
We will provide them with the information for investigation.
So they don't have the name list of traders, is what you're saying?
We share the information with them.
Do they have the name list?
I don't think this question is fair because
it's a very simple question. Does
share the
Hong Kong
information.
Customs have the name list of people who hold ivory stocks?
The government has the name list.
Despite all of this, there is good news. The price of smuggled ivory in Asia is plummeting. In 2014, it hit a high of $2,100 a kilo, driven by demand from China. By the end of last year, it had fallen by half, and it is still falling. Hong Kong and China have now committed to ending the legal ivory trade. For Africa's elephants, these two things could mean the difference between survival and extinction.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reporting from Hong Kong. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from Namibia, where elephant numbers have risen substantially. Now, Russia's new spaceport is in business now. After some delay, the Vostochny Cosmodrome has hosted its first successful launch. Russian TV showed the Soyuz rocket taking off into a blue sky in light winds, though foreign media organizations weren't allowed in to the new space center. So why has Russia built this new facility rather than the old one at Baikonur in Kazakhstan? Famil Ismailov is news editor of the BBC's Russian service.
The main problem with Baikonur was that this particular launch pad is now in a different and foreign soil. It used to be one part of the Soviet Union and everything was the same, the soil was one country, but it's not. And there had been problems between Moscow and Astana in deciding who was going to pay and how much for renting the Cosmodrome. Sometimes the rockets exploded, some of them just fell in midair. You know, the rocket fuel is very, very poisonous. So after the complaints from Kazakhstan, Russia had to pay some compensation, but now they can move at least some of the launches to Vostochny, although you have to remember that there will be no manned flight launched from Vostochny until 2023 at least.
2023. So they had to pay Kazakhstan to rent Baikonur, but how much did this one cost? I mean, I think as projects go, it's pretty expensive, isn't it?
It was huge. All in all, it's going to cost about 180 billion rubles. To put it in perspective, it's about 1.8 billion pounds. So it was huge. It took about 3 years to come to this point, and we're talking now only about a launch table for launching light to medium-sized rockets. So they want to create another one next to it, which will be able to launch heavy rockets like Angara that are able to take heavy load, including piloted spacecraft.
And where is it? I mean, it's in the far east of Russia. I think I read somewhere that it's actually just dozens of kilometers from the Chinese border. Is that right?
That's the downside of it. It's in Amurskaya Oblast, which is far in the far east, about 6 degrees to the north from Baikonur if you compare the latitude, and it's away from residential areas, so if anything goes wrong, people won't suffer. But the downside is it's away from major communications. You have to build a new airport, and Russia actually has to transfer some of the construction of the rocket, the facilities, down closer to the new launch pad, because they cannot move everything 5,500 kilometers from where it is now and ship everything, every single bit. The rockets are huge, down to Vostochny Cosmodrome.
President Putin, he got a bit testy, didn't he, because there was this delay to the launch, and he wasn't that happy about it.
There was a 24-hour delay, and they said the glitch was in a cable, but finally the launch happened. Everything went successful as far as we know by now. But Mr. Putin was very angry with Mr. Rogozin, who was in charge of building the Cosmodrome, as I said, a deputy prime minister in charge of the military complex, and also the head of Roscosmos also got some
addressing down
from Mr. Putin, yes, put it that way.
That was Family Ismailov from the BBC's Russian service. And just to tell you, in the past few minutes, the US Vice President Joe Biden has arrived in Iraq, partly to urge unity amongst Iraqi politicians. You'll remember there's a bit of a political crisis going on there, and also continued momentum in the fight against ISIL. He is the highest level, but third US official to visit Iraq this month. You're listening to News Hour from the BBC. Do stay with us. Much more to come in the next half hour.
Distribution of the BBC NewsHour is supported by Avalara, tax automation for businesses of all sizes. Avalara works to simplify sales tax and other business taxes with real-time rates and automatic filing. More at avalara.com, AVALARA.com. And by Kronos, offering cloud-based workforce management solutions designed to reduce labor costs, improve workforce productivity, and minimize compliance risk. More at Kronos.com. Kronos, workforce innovation that works.
The struggle that resulted in Obamacare began with President Harry Truman.
The greatest gap in our social security structure is the lack of adequate provision for the nation's health.
Truman in 1948. On the next Brian Lehrer Show, our 30 Issues election series continues with a history of the healthcare debate and why it's not universal coverage yet. Also, Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Tracy K. Smith. The Brian Lehrer Show, weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by Glen Mead, an independent trust company founded by the Pugh family to manage their charitable assets. More from Lee Miller at 212-328-7331.
You're listening to the BBC on WNYC. Good morning, I'm Satirius Johnson. The U.S. economy has started 2016 with the weakest growth in 2 years. The Commerce Department says the gross domestic product, the broadest measure of economic health, grew by a tiny 0.5% from January through March, after growing 1.4% in the fourth quarter of last year. But economists are expecting a rebound in the second quarter, forecasting growth of around 2%. The number of people seeking U.S. unemployment benefits has gone up, but it's still near the lowest level in 4 decades. The Labor Department says weekly applications for unemployment aid rose by 9,000 last week, after falling the week before to the lowest level since November 1973. The less volatile 4-week average dropped to a 42-year low. Volkswagen says it set aside $8.8 billion to buy back or fix diesel-powered cars that were rigged to cheat emissions tests. The German automaker also says the set-aside covers fines and legal costs worldwide Analysts say the final bill will likely be much higher. Police arrested 120 young men in the Bronx on weapons and drug charges in what prosecutors are calling the biggest gang takedown in city history. Most of the violence happened in and around 3 public housing complexes in the Bronx, where City Councilman Andy King says NYCHA, the city's housing authority, hasn't been following its own rules that bar convicted felons from living in public housing.
NYCHA's going to have to do a better job at, securing and following the rules that are on their own books. And if they need to create more stringent rules, then do so. So it gives them the power to move the bad element out and so people don't live in fear.
U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara says the civil division of his office is currently looking at whether NYCHA is meeting federal requirements to provide safe and decent housing. The housing authority says many conditions influence the presence of gang and other illegal activity, and that it continues to work closely with the police department to address the challenges. The Army Corps of Engineers has cleared the way for the construction of a 2.5-acre park on a pier in the Hudson River. The New York Times reports construction on the $130 million project known as Pier 55 could begin as soon as this summer. The project would replace a deteriorating pier in Hudson River Park at about 13th Street. Partly sunny this morning, cloudy later, slight chance of light rain in the afternoon, getting up to around 60 today. Right now it's 50 degrees in New York City at 9:33.
Coming up next on NewsHour, we'll be crossing over to Tim Franks on the US election trail. First, though, our daily look at the world of business, and today the business of e-cigarettes. They're growing in popularity, also known as vaping, across the world, but should they be promoted by public health bodies as a beneficial substitute for tobacco? Well, here in the UK, the Royal College of Physicians says yes, they should. They've drawn up a long report looking at the evidence and the arguments. Professor John Britton is one of the authors.
The evidence in the UK is pretty overwhelming. People who've used electronic cigarettes are about 50% more likely to quit smoking than those that don't use them. The main reason that people try electronic cigarettes is because they either want to quit or cut down on their smoking, which is usually the precursor to quitting. And the uptake so far has been pretty impressive, so they're much more popular now than medicinal forms of nicotine.
Does it simply prolong the addiction?
Yes, it does, but the addiction to nicotine that underlies dependence on tobacco smoking isn't particularly harmful. It's on a par with the addiction that most of us have to caffeine. And so, long term, if you're just a nicotine user, you probably don't come to any grief from it. It's the other toxins in tobacco smoke that kill you. And the beauty of electronic cigarettes and other devices in development like them is that they give you the nicotine without the poisons.
Are there any harmful side effects to e-cigarettes?
There will be, and we won't know what they are until 3 or 4 decades have gone by. But inhaling hot vapor, sometimes oxidant vapor, into the lungs is going to damage the lungs. I don't think there's any question about that. But the level of damage and the level of risk of other disease, lung cancer, heart disease and so on, is likely to be dramatically lower than that of smoking. So if you're a non-nicotine user, you'd be crazy to start vaping. But if you're a smoker, it's a no-brainer, and you should make the change as quickly as you can.
Is there any truth to the argument that vaping e-cigarettes may encourage people to start smoking?
Well, there's no evidence that that's happening to any appreciable degree in the UK so far, which is not to say that it won't, but at present the evidence is that people who use electronic cigarettes are almost exclusively people who are already smokers or have been smokers, or in children, it's children who are already experimenting with tobacco, so at very high risk of becoming smokers. And for any smoker, moving from tobacco to electronic cigarette is a smart move.
Is there a case to be made for allowing people to use e-cigarettes inside, for example, at work and in public places? Because they've effectively been put in the same category as normal cigarettes, haven't they? But given the benefits, wouldn't that make sense?
There are situations where it would make sense. For the most part, first of all, I don't think there's any evidence, we found no evidence, that the vapour from electronic cigarettes is harmful to other people, but there is a courtesy issue about it.
But on public health grounds?
But on public health grounds, say for example, in another year or so, we have a licensed electronic cigarette available that is prescribed. You'll really be saying to smokers, you cannot use it.
This is NewsHour from the BBC. I'm James Menendez. We're going to head straight to the United States now, in the state of Indiana, scene of the next stage in that long process of choosing the candidates for November's presidential election. NewsHour's Tim Franks is there.
Welcome to breakfast at the Corner Grind Cafe in Terre Haute, Indiana, the state which, as you say, it holds its primaries for the parties to choose their presidential candidates next Tuesday, and it's widely seen as Donald Trump's opponent's pretty much last hope to stop the Republican frontrunner from winning his party's nomination outright. But Terre Haute, this small city where I am, has another claim for your attention. It's in a county, Vigo County, which in one regard beats any other of the 3,000 plus counties across this great nation. This is the place they call the Crossroads of America, where the freight trains still roll through, shrieking and blasting, where the first roads from the east coast to the west coast, from the very north to the deep south, intersect. Just here at these crossroads in the city of Terre Haute. It's a quietly spoken place, an unremarkable place, a perfect slice of middle America, except that it's also unlike anywhere else in the United States. Terre Haute, or to be more precise, the small county it sits in, Vigo County, is the most accurate bellwether in the country. The people here have voted for the winning candidate in presidential elections more often than in any other county in the United States in the past 120 odd years. Put it another way, you want to be president, you've got to convince the people here. Hello, good morning. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And you've got to convince these 11 women meeting for breakfast in the Crossroads Cafe. It's the place they come every Wednesday at 7 in the morning. For some of them, it's a ritual going back more than 30 years. Can we pull up a chair? So, can I ask how excited, how disturbed, how intrigued, how do you feel about the presidential election 2016?
Scared. I think the populist movement on both the right and the left has been a long time in building. Economically, we've had great disturbances in the last 20, 30 years. People who don't understand what's happened to them, they're striking out, and they're striking out with what is being offered.
Do you all have family who are living in Terre Haute? Yeah? Well, most of you seem to. It's been understood for generations that, you know, our kids would have it better than we would, and we would have it better than our parents. How far do you think that your children, your grandchildren, can be guaranteed to have a better way of life than you've enjoyed?
Honestly, do I think that their world is going to be better than our world? No. Well, my kids are just graduating from college, and they won't be coming back to Terre Haute. The jobs aren't here. Thank you.
And maybe that's another reason Terre Haute and the county it sits in vote like America. Because, well, they look like America. These shuttered shops and shabby houses, they're the badges of an industrial heartland that have been decades in the decline. The population is shrinking. You do get the odd newcomer. Don Campbell's one of them. He's moved here, albeit only for about 18 months or so, from New York. He's spending his time as a documentary filmmaker trying to capture the bellwether.
I came to Terre Haute because I found out about this curious electoral phenomenon, and I thought that could be a really great way to turn the political story upside down, and instead of looking at the candidates and the parties, and to look at people and some kind of really emblematic slice of America, to look at people and see what was making them change their minds or driving them to or away from the polls this year. One of the things that I've said is I feel that this is a community that also exists at like an intersection between resignation and optimism.
There's another balance that Vigo County strikes, another mix that makes it the perfect bellwether, and that's the mix of town and country. Okay. Ooh, Mars, this is a beast. This is the biggest tractor I've ever been in.
Well, they make them bigger, but it's pretty good size.
Yeah.
Shut the door.
Sure. Mars Harlan is a corn and soybean farm with 2,000 acres, which you can see sweep before you from the cab of his monster tractor. He's 61. His family have been farming this land for 200 years. As with many people, times are tough. But also, like many people in Vigo County, Mars Harlan's mind remains resolutely open.
So I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for yet. My dad was an FDR Democrat. He never voted for Republicans. I'm a little bit not quite that strong. I have voted for Republicans in my lifetime, and he did not approve of it.
But, I mean, are you voting in the primaries?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'll vote. I always vote.
Okay. So have you registered as a Democrat this time around?
Yes, a Democrat.
And have you decided who you're going to vote for?
I don't know. I'm just not sold on any of them. I'm really not.
Are you excited about the election in November? Or, I mean, some people have said to me that they're a bit scared.
I'm worried. I'm concerned. Whoever's elected is going to be president for the next 4 years, and we ought to be prepared to deal with it, whoever it is.
Yeah, but a lot of people are talking in much more apocalyptic terms, aren't they?
Well, I don't like to think that bad. Hopefully, your reasonable minds will prevail on that kind of stuff, and then they'll work it out and make things happen. Things that have to happen.
That was Mars Harlan, the Vigo County farmer, taking the long view, like he says he always does. There is a shorter view, though, to be had here, and that's that next Tuesday is a massive day for the never-Trumpers of the Republican Party, because if Donald Trump can win big here in Indiana, well, he might well get to that magic number of 1,237 delegates and win the nomination outright.
Thinking about one of Donald Trump's opponents, Ted Cruz, he's named a running mate.
He has. He's been campaigning vigorously in Indiana, and he yesterday spent the day trying to wrest the media talk back. So he named Carly Fiorina, who was part of the race early on. She numerically wasn't a roaring success before she dropped out, but it's felt by the political experts here that she's a good speaker, a good debater. She might play well in California. She could be a good counter to Hillary Clinton. You know, she's also a counter to Donald Trump's perceived woman problem. Ted Cruz is also, though, he's supposed to be helped here in Indiana by a deal with the other person in the primary race, John Kasich, not campaigning here. Well, you know, just anecdotally, a lot of Republican voters I've been speaking to have been saying, hang it, they're going to vote for John Kasich anyway, because they really don't like the other two at all.
Just thinking about Donald Trump, he gave a major foreign policy speech last night. What were the bulletin points?
One of the big things, James, was the manner in which he delivered it. It was more measured delivery, it was off a teleprompter. And, you know, Donald Trump is a bit of a moving target when it comes to foreign policy, because in some ways he suggests that he's going to disengage a bit more. He talks about America first, about resetting the relationship with Russia and China. In other ways, he's saying he wants it to be much more muscular, especially when it comes to going after the group that calls itself Islamic State. But I think that this is Donald Trump really trying to say, look, I can be a president, I can be a commander-in-chief, trust me.
Tim Franks in Indiana. In theory, South Africa should be a good place to be gay. When apartheid ended, it was the first country in the world to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation in its constitution. And it was the fifth to legalise same-sex marriage. But as James Fletcher's been finding out, the reality of being a gay man or woman in South Africa can be far removed from those lofty ideals.
Betty Melamu sits on a brown leather sofa in her living room in the township of Everton, cradling a picture of her daughter Pasca and singing her favourite song.
I can always have the feel.
It's a song that she loved a lot. Whenever she would listen to a radio or when she's from church, she would sing that song.
Sadness is etched in Betty's thin, drawn face. Pasca was a lesbian, something her family knew and accepted. She just turned 21 and completed her final high school exams when she went to a party with friends last December.
I don't know after the party what happened, but she didn't come back.
Pasca's body was found in a field in a neighbouring township 2 days later. She'd been brutally beaten and mutilated and could only be identified by a tattoo on her leg. In early January, local activists took to the streets bearing rainbow flags and banners to demand justice for Pasca. They felt the police investigation was moving too slowly. Lindiwe Nhlapo is from VAL LGBTI, one organisation which has been monitoring the police.
So for us, it's like the police is not really doing anything.
Pasca was just one of 3 lesbian, gay and transgender people murdered in South Africa during a 6-week period late last year. Do you think things are getting better?
Not really.
Is it getting worse?
I'd say it is kind of getting worse.
This feeling is widespread among activists and is despite a new approach to hate crimes launched by the government in 2011.
We are busy as government and as civil society with programs to try and educate people about LGBTI rights, that gay rights are human rights.
John Jeffrey is South Africa's Deputy Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development.
But we obviously can't police every individual in the country. Obviously, where a crime is committed, we need to ensure that the police investigate properly, and that's what is happening.
The process so far is focused on the justice side. There isn't enough of going down into communities at these kind of grassroots and trying to get to where the homophobia is and change those attitudes.
Yes, but we've got a large population. That's an ongoing task. So it's not something that can be dealt with, settled overnight.
I work very hard for Pasca to finish this school.
Pasca's mother, Betty Melamu, shows me the school results certificate that was the key to her daughter's dreams. It arrived after she was murdered.
I pray every night, every morning, and I want those who did this thing to my child to arrested, all of them.
Almost 4 months after Pasca was murdered, there still haven't been any arrests. For many lesbian and gay people and their families in South Africa, safety and justice still feel a long way off.
That was James Fletcher reporting from South Africa. You can hear more from James and his report in assignment this week here on the BBC World Service.
Distribution of the BBC NewsHour is supported by Staples, offering tools for small business, including color copies and presentations, manuals, and customized framing, designed and printed in-store or ordered online at staples.com. Staples, make more happen. And by Angie's List, committed to building a local service economy based on transparency, fair prices, and quality work for members. Online reviews and hiring tools at angieslist.com.
Supporting WHYY, the Haverford School presents its 18th annual Edward R. Hallowell Literary Lecture featuring Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Natasha Trethewey. Trethewey, author of 4 collections of poetry, was the 19th United States Poet Laureate and is the Robert W. Woodruff Professor of English and Creative Writing at Emory University. An evening with Natasha Trethewey on Monday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. at the Haverford School. No ticket required. For more information, details at haverford.org/speakers.
A reminder of our main story here on NewsHour. Dozens of people have been killed in the Syrian city of Aleppo as a UN-backed ceasefire appears close to collapse. A little earlier, one of the key figures who brokered the ceasefire, the UN Special Envoy to Syria, Staffan de Mistura, told this programme that the warring sides must come back to the table.
When people are being bombed and shelled, it's very difficult to be able to actually talk about peace. But there is also no alternative to that. We hope and we will be pushing for a renewal of the cessation hostility. But at a certain point, you need to know we need to come back and discuss the future of Syria.
One other headline this hour, Britain's main opposition Labour Party has suspended a former London mayor amid a deepening row over claims of anti-Semitism. This is James Menendez with NewsHour from the BBC World Service. It was Australia's worst mass shooting. 20 years ago today, a lone gunman walked into the visitor cafe at Port Arthur on the island of Tasmania and opened fire. He was armed with 2 semi-automatic rifles, a shotgun and plenty of ammunition. By the time he was arrested by police, 35 people were dead. It prompted sweeping changes of Australia's gun laws. We'll be looking at the success or otherwise of that in a moment. But first, a reminder of the terrible events of that day. John and Gay Fiddler survived the massacre. I must warn you, the descriptions of what happened are graphic, and many listeners will find their experiences extremely disturbing.
We were just sitting there and there was a loud explosion, and I recognised straight away that it was a shot. Our first reaction was it was a reenactment, but when I looked around to see where the noise came from, I immediately knew that it wasn't, that it was for real, because he didn't have any uniform on or anything like that, and he just shot heads, just walked around shooting heads. I watched him shoot the 2 Asian people in the head from about 3 feet away, and the heads just disappeared. And he took a step sideways so that he was in front of the next one,